Good afternoon and welcome all. I'm Archisman Mahapatra from Grid Council. Thank you for joining in for this exciting upcoming webinar today. Now, we all aspire to be leaders, and leadership skills can be acquired and further customized as per individual vision and contextual needs. From my readings on leadership in public health, especially in the Indian context, I find community medicine and allied subjects, public health, developmental studies, and others as exceptionally glamorous fields. I observe that 5 C's are critical for us: content, confidence, communication, charisma, and collaboration. Now, these are not the entire gamut, these are not the entire skill sets. In our medical schools, we gain the content part and to some extent the confidence for evolving as leaders, but there is much more to it. We at Grid bringing forth a series of 5 webinars with the best and most experienced in the field to complement all that we learn in our respective institutional ecosystems. It's a collaborative and inclusive effort. The details of these webinars are in the flyer, which we have already circulated, and we shall be scheduling this soon, one after the other. We hope that you find the deliberations engaging. I thank the panelists, Arora sir, Sanjeev sir, Zodpe sir, and Savita madam for sparing the time for talking to us. Thanks to our moderators, Dr. Shiv, Dr. Anil, and our rapporteur, Dr. Wasim, for being at the helm for this webinar. Our moderators for today are from Northeast, North, and South India. They are in different career stages in terms of seniority. Dr. Shivsekhar Datta is a professor in community medicine at TMC Agartala. He is an acclaimed faculty, researcher, and public health professional. He has received several scientific awards for community-based research and holds special expertise in mixed methods research, community development programs, medical education, leadership, and team building. Dr. Anil Koparkar is an associate professor in community medicine at AIIMS Gorakhpur. His interests are in sexual and reproductive health, disaster management, and community ownerships. Dr. Wasim Ansari is an assistant professor in community medicine at ESIC Medical College and Hospital, Gulbarga. He holds interest in maternal and child health and in medical education. He's a FIMER fellow and is a member of District Epidemiological Unit. He represents his college for effective implementation of the national health programs. All three are very active members of IAPSM and IPHA. And I would very strongly recommend all youngsters to take up membership of these professional associations for continuous learning and for further strengthening of professional organizations. I thank my team, Doctors Ritika, Priyanka, Shikha, Kavita, Chandraprabha, Divita, and Bharati for all the background work. Over to the moderators for taking this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Archisman. A very warm welcome to all the participants and of course to our panelists. As Dr. Archisman has said, this is the first of the series of webinars and we are organizing. The first, this webinar has been titled, as you all know, Public Health Research in India, Ecosystem Health System, Capacity Building and Research Management. So often we were thinking that how a postgraduate student or a young public health professional would approach a research-oriented career. As a postgraduate or maybe public health professional, we often amaze how to excel and lead or advance in research arena. In fact, this young and fresh tenure actually can be an asset to us, what I feel. Because at that time, we have the energy, exuberance, the fresh education and knowledge of technologies that others in our company may not have. And we also bring the fresh perspective, a new look at old problems. So as a young public health fellow, we can still be a leader even if we are not in a position of power. In fact, if you exercise your leadership skills, your reach to a more desirable position can be, the road towards your desirable position can be much shorter and much more happier journey. So because remember, winners are seen as leaders. Now with this, I introduce our 4 speakers, primarily Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, who will be talking on health system research in India, Dr. N.K. Arora, who will be talking on understanding the public health research ecosystem in India, Professor Sanjay Zodpe. We have requested him to talk about research capacity building and Indian academic institutes, Dr. Savita Iyer, We have requested Madam to talk on research management, the current status and challenges in India. So with this, I hand over the baton to Dr. Anil, my second moderator, to introduce Dr. Arora sir and brief about his talk.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I'm Dr. Anil and welcome you all. As Shiv sir has rightly said, this is all the elements we have to acquire. And I hope today's webinar will be very good opportunity to learn from this stalwart in the area of public health, especially leadership in public health research. So I will request all the participants to keep yourself muted during the webinar. Approaching to the first session, you must be getting several questions like what are the key traits and skills of leading the public health research in India? We also face the question like how to research ecosystem, leadership skill, influence one another in the India. Could they address inequities in the health research? We also face sometime that how we can prioritize public health research among medical professionals in India. And these are the questions we often face. So to talk on this topic, to address these questions, we have got very eminent speaker, Professor N.K. Arora. He is the Executive Director, the Incline Trust International, New Delhi. In 2018, he was appointed President AIIMS Patna and AIIMS Devgar. So he has got good experience there also. Dr. Arora is seasoned policymaker, senior researcher, and public health practitioner committed to the cause of improvement of health of the community. He has been part of several national and international policy-making bodies with a focus on maternal and child health, notable among these being the National Technical Advisory Group of Immunization, National AEFI Committee Expert Group for the rollout of rotavirus vaccine, and many more. As a member of Global Advisory Committee for Vaccine Safety, WHO, he has contributed to the development of guidelines for vaccine safety surveillance. So he is contributing in COVID era enormously. He chairs the Scientific Advisory Group, Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, on COVID-19 related vaccine. And notably, he is here because he has been dedicated to the creation of efficient public health leader, initiating one of the first comprehensive course on leadership in country, the Leadership and Management Training Program. So without wasting any further time, I would have requested Dr. N.K. Arora for his talk, but unfortunately he has got some other work. So he has sent us a recorded video. So I will request coordinator to please play the video.
Friends, it's really a great pleasure and honor to be part of this series of webinar organized by Grid Council. I have known Dr. Archisman for almost a decade now, and truly impressed by his leadership and ready to take new initiatives and innovative initiatives. So I really feel very honored and feel proud to be part of this webinar. So I have been given the task to talk about health research leadership issues in our research institutions, in our medical colleges, and overall in the Indian context. So I would like to start with a statement. I'm sure many of us or many of you will not like it. Most of the leaders do not have a good horoscope. It's quite bad horoscope. They get not by luck, or they do not get by some divine design. They get whatever hard work they do. And that is the key difference. I'm sure if you go around and look at the horoscope of leaders in any area, any age, you will find that those who become leaders, usually the primary focus of these people is their persistence and hard work. They are disciplined people, and they wouldn't have got anything on a platter. if you get something very good on platter, then most of the times we do not respect that. And I strongly believe that one of the core characteristics is persistence of a leader. I'm sure most of us have experiences, and when we were growing, either in school days or subsequently in medical colleges or in during post-graduation and even subsequently, many of us know that our peers, they were very bright. They would come up with good innovative ideas, but somewhere along the line, they get distracted. They find something which they feel are opportunities, but you find them getting stuck at a place where the leadership becomes distant dream for these people. And there is a word in Sanskrit which is lobh samvaran, and lobh, all of us know, it is greed, and samvaran is basically resisting. Most of us do get diverted or distracted when we are looking at some short-term gains, and we think this is better to have this short-term gains and not thinking about your long-term dreams, whether you will be able to fulfill or not. And it is here that differentiation between leaders and others start coming. Leaders may not be the brightest human being on earth, but I think they are the most persistent people. And over the time, you start feeling that the decision making or the continuity they have done takes them to a different level. Another thing, many people think that leaders are very ambitious. A lot of us, most of us are ambitious. Anybody who pursues a profession or wants to be ahead of others, ambition is an essential part of a human character. But I think the difference which makes you separate is persistence with ambition. And because if you have to fulfill your any dream, persistence is required. I would like to narrate a small story here from mythology. Ravan, who was king of Lanka, is considered the best and the most revered bhakt of Lord Shiva. And it is said that he worshipped for 12 years on standing on a single leg. This is symbolic. The fact is that he was persistent and worked for over a decade, and then only he got that status of the foremost disciple of Lord Shiva. I think this applies to all of our aspects of life, that persistence and continuity is the key and which sets you apart. And it takes time. You cannot shortcut this. Basic issue is that we are greedy. रास्ते में मैं मेनका दिखाई तो उसके पीछे कर लिए, रंभा दिखाई तो उसके पीछे चले गए. So ये जो कहानी है, it has deep meaning. These distract. So suddenly I am doing basically, let's say an example that I work on anemia in women. Suddenly I get an opportunity that there is a project on hypertension in diabetics. I said, let me take this, whether it will come back again or not. Then again, after 2 years, I again say my expertise is anemia and pregnancy. And after a while, you certainly find that now the WHO has said that household level focus is required for risk stratification and to take care of diarrhea and pneumonia. You start running after that. So in this melee, your focus is lost. So the key is, and that is what happens, you enter onto policy making tables not by doing policy research. Policy research, what is policy research? I think if you continue to work for 10 years, 15 years on anemia, first of all, you will be able to resolve a problem. Once you resolve a problem, then you start understanding the other issues, that what are the problems in the other domains also. So it is important that we should not start looking at Rambhas and Menkas on our way. That is a primary reason for the less successful career paths of many of us. Another dimension of leaders is technical competence. The field, the core subject in which you are there, you have to be good. There is no shortcut. You cannot make a fool. We take example of anybody currently in biomedical sciences. Let's take the example of Professor Vinod Paul, who is member of Niti Aayog, and one of the few pediatricians who have reached up to that place, or probably the first pediatrician who has reached at that level. And when you look back his professional career as a pediatrician and a neonatologist, he has been always outstanding and one of the best in the country. So that professional and technical competence is a core issue, because leadership, the foundation of leadership, does start with your competence of the core subject. I remember another pediatrician, Dr. Bhan. He became Secretary, Department of Biotechnology. And again, he was one of those who was outstanding as a pediatric gastroenterologist, but moved on gradually to public health and then became Secretary of Department of Biotechnology and provided a new platform. Today, many of the vaccines we are looking at, which are made in India, many of the novel scientific institutions which have come up, the strengthening of scientific infrastructure in Northeast is all attributed to Dr. M.K. Bhan. And again, these kind of people who are outstanding and have become leaders, but primarily the foundation has been very strong subject knowledge and understanding, and because only of that you can build on. Third dimension is that the opportunities keep on banging over on our door at all times, but there is this word of smart encashment. Those who are leaders, in the context of subject competence and persistence, they will encash the opportunity which helps them to achieve their ambitions and dreams. While many of us get distracted. So opportunities are of all type, but we get distracted if we are not mindful of our dreams on one side, and on the other side, we do not want to persist, because persistence required a lot of patience within yourself. And so again, I have another example of Professor N.K. Ganguly. I'm picking up examples from our immediate, so that many of us can relate. Let us take the example of Dr. N.K. Ganguly. He was professor of microbiology and then became of experimental medicine at PGI Chandigarh, and then persisted with that. He did not move here and there, and then became Director General of ICMR. And there started his new career, where on one side, I think he learned public health after becoming DG ICMR, but on the other hand, he also was able to quickly synthesize that how from bench to public health it can be bridged, and that translational process. And here, during his tenure of, I think it was almost 9 years, ICMR became a real household name, not only in India, but globally also. People realize that it's a key research institution in India. So he utilized the opportunity and he encashed that opportunity very well. And there is something very important, that the leaders, most of the times when they are working, they succeed and they are recognized as leaders when it is for larger societal good. At individual level, all of them benefit. But when the aim and overall goal is societal good, then it is much easier to achieve the leadership role. Take the example of Vinod Paul I gave, take the example of M.K. Bhan, take the example of N.K. Ganguly. These are three examples of science people. All of them are currently working for larger societal good. And larger societal good helps them to even achieve personal uh, kind of a recognition as well. But you look at we have many of our scriptures in all religions. Again, this point is repeatedly highlighted that leaders start on a path which is got a larger societal good, but at the end, individual benefits. And so that needs to be kept in mind at all times. Leadership is also is something which we need to think about, that how despite societal barriers, one is able to achieve those things which are normally not easy to get it. A recent example is one Professor Renu Sarup. She has just recently retired as Secretary, Department of Biotechnology. She's a basically science person, basic science doctorate, but was involved in setting up an institution of its own kind, which is unique for low and middle income countries, what is called BIRAC. And for this, she persistently worked for almost 10 to 15 years. And in the process, initially people thought that whether it will succeed or fail. But I must tell you, for leaders, there is no other option. They are not worried about failure or success. They have just only one. Most of the leaders don't have a plan B. And so this BIRAC has come into existence primarily with a focus to bring industry and academia together. Now, this is a very unique initiative in the country. And it started as a small one, but during COVID, it has played such a major role. This arranged marriage was between science, both national, international, and Indian industry. And you see the product. We have about 5 or 6 COVID vaccines de novo developed within India. And so this transformation occurred not because the ecosystem was there, but ecosystem was created, and some individuals become a reason for that initial persistence and not deciding to lose heart at any time. They are not distracted. They do not change. They think इस देश में कुछ नहीं हो सकता. नहीं, everything can happen for a leader. Everything can happen in anywhere. I am given to understand that two of our faculty friends here who are also reputees. One of them was an associate professor in JIPMER, but at some point of his life, he decided to take in a more difficult path and shifted to one of the northeastern states and in an upcoming new medical college. The person thought that going into a new area where the facilities may be not there, but it gives you an opportunity to establish an institution, establish an ecosystem according to your own liking, dreams, perceptions. Now, this is one of the key characteristics of leaders. They dare to take decisions where a usual person will not take that decision. They dare to take those decisions where outcome is uncertain. Leadership in a lot of these UN organizations, in their younger days, they have started in some very difficult African countries, Latin American countries, or Asian countries, have got the ground experience there. And then later, after that initial experience of a decade or 10, 15 years, then their rise is meteoric. Today, we look at them that they are so well placed, they are in a leadership position. But the fact is, they by design make an effort to take those decisions. There are certain people I know in WHO headquarters who spent, at least two of them I know, one of them worked in DRC Congo for 10 years. DRC Congo is one of the most unstable and country with civil strife, difficulty in movement, etc., etc. And today, the person is additional DG at WHO headquarters. And the primarily the reason for this person to going up to that level is that experience of humanity in the field transformed him in a way that the person is able to take decisions, keeping context into this, and the person is very well respected. Rather than choosing a path of comfort, they are ready to take decisions. People who have joined in Northeastern institutions, we know 10 years ago, most of the places had difficulty in transport, access, facilities, instruments, everything, but still there are people, and a lot of them have done outstandingly. They are recognized not only nationally, but internationally, because they decided to take a path which was not comfortable or smooth. Now, coming to a broad framework of workplace, what are the key issues or ecosystem which facilitates research? So here I must say, we did a nationwide study across the country in 40 institutions. And what we find is that research facilitatory environment does not exist in many institutions in the country. Particularly, most of the medical colleges have an ecosystem which by any standards cannot be called very facilitatory. But within that constraint, we found that leaders do exist. So how are they able to create that ecosystem for themselves? One of the first characteristics of these people is they know and they learn how to make the best of available resources. Most of us keep on ruing that अगर ये होता तो हम ये कर लेते, ये नहीं है इसलिए मैं नहीं कर पाता हूँ, मेरा हेड ऑफ डिपार्टमेंट मेरे को दुख करता है. No, but the leader says, okay, how can I work? And so the other part of this making the best of available resources is negotiating skills. So I'll give you example. I come from AIIMS, New Delhi, and most of the AIIMS have that kind of ecosystem. Is that if my head of department is not forwarding my application, research application, so what should be done? So there are, most of the time there is no difficulty, but occasionally there are individuals. So a rule was brought in about 30 years ago at AIIMS New Delhi, that if your application is not forwarded in 48 hours by the head of department, it will be deemed forwarded. So either the head of department has to write a reason for not forwarding it, or otherwise it loses. So actually, I'm giving you an idea that you should fight for this kind of a thing, so that ultimately, what do we want? One of the core issue of research leadership is intellectual autonomy. You want to do what you want to do, and for that, you should be allowed to do what you want to do. This requires both the things. I should be having these machines, that one, but we know that with collaboration, with partnership within the institution, with next department, with neighborhood department, neighborhood faculty member, or other institutions in my city, or within the state, or within the country, or internationally. Because partnership is one, again, these leaders always know. Going back to COVID, Covaxin was between ICMR and Bharat Biotech, totally Indian. But we have other new vaccines, for example, DNA vaccine, mRNA vaccine is coming, protein subunit vaccine is coming. In all these, international science collaboration with local science and industry brought together. So leaders know how to collaborate, and collaboration means I'm sure you will have some discussion on how to collaborate and partner. But the fundamental is, when you partner with somebody, it has to be on equality basis. And equality means na sar aankhein utha karke na jhuka karke, aankhein mila karke baat karna. That's partnership. When you do and you learn to do partnership, your progress becomes very fast, because then the resource deficiency also is taken care of. You complement your deficiency with somebody else's strength. And negotiation means negotiation, you have to learn. I think all of you must go a formal course on negotiation. You should read about negotiation, negotiating within your family, negotiating within your department, negotiating within your institutions, with your funding agencies, and with your partners. Negotiation is very important. We think many times that this is a common sense, one can learn it, but I must tell you that this is not common sense. It's a science, and we should learn to negotiate. And as part of all leadership programs, this is something, an essential part. So once you learn how to make the best of available resources, you learn to negotiate, you very soon find that you become a vehicle of catalyzing change in the ecosystem. You start making ecosystem which is research friendly, and it not only helps you, it helps your other colleagues, it helps you other faculty member in the institutions also. And so this, I would say, the broad framework of leadership is there as far as I am concerned. And a lot of things which I have said has my direct personal experience on these, and this is what has helped me to do things which otherwise becomes quite difficult, and we keep on saying not possible, not possible. No, everything is possible, provided you decide that you need to do it. On a point which are important points for leadership, the important points are, you must know how to manage research. The important point is how to do research methodology. So these are issues which are important when you want to do high quality research, you want to keep on improving that. But some of the core characteristics which I just mentioned are important components of our life, which take us to a very different orbit. And but finally, I would like to conclude that have patience. So persistence we start with, but patience we have to be at the other end of our spectrum of qualities should be patience. Wait for your turn. And everybody's turn comes. It is just a matter of time. Somebody may achieve it in 5 years, the others may achieve in 7 years, but by 12 years, I think everybody achieves. Thank you very much.
I wanted to hear from you for the audience, how to address the inequity which exists in the research ecosystem.
Many times we equate inequity with justice. And I think you're also talking about there is injustice, that even if you're working, you do not get your due. So many times we feel that one is being is not being treated fairly. But the fact is that I will take you to my first point, that persistence is important. Most of us researchers try only once or twice. But I must tell you that even being in research for 30 years or 40 years, we apply at 10 sites, success rate is never more than 20%, two sites. So the so-called inequity is also taken care of if you persist. The second issue is that many times one may perceive, and to a certain extent this may be correct, that resources are not shared in an equitable manner. And whether it is research resources or opportunities, if it is coming, doesn't matter. I think just crying on ruing over that, I would say I would keep on making independent, because we have to accept certain realities. There are personal biases. There are biases in terms of the relationship dynamics, and if once we, and then there are resource constraints. Once we start accepting these as reality of life, and then start moving with a persistent and focused manner, over the time you will find that you can not only be taking care of yourself, but you can help a lot of other youngsters as an example, as a role model on one side, but on the other hand, you can also fight for equity for them also. Because primarily the research is a highly competitive environment. It is filled with highly ambitious people. It is filled with highly persistent people. So conflict is inevitable. We have to accept conflict, but we can overcome it by continuing to work towards that. So I would think the younger faculty members and your colleagues as well as younger people, be very generous and kind to them, and even help them. International forums, I have realized that people go for extensive consultation. Many times we think it's a business, just like a business secret. My research is also secret. I think we are in a fool's paradise. Science is something, the more input you get, better refined. Our proposals are not well written or well done because we do not get input from our colleagues. If we bring in, nobody has to copy and to do it same thing is very few people can do it. It requires a very different kind of a frame of mind. So get and create an ecosystem around yourself, so that get input from others, plus encourage younger people, help them to make presentations at national, international fora, help younger people to interact with the seniors or the other departments or funding agencies. It gives them confidence on one side, but on the other hand, it will also give a very good name for you. You know who are the most successful directors. The fundamental when somebody is selecting a director is that who is happy when a younger faculty member makes an achievement. I think that is again a very important leadership quality. We are not in politics. We are talking about health research. And when younger people come up, we should be very happy, and you will find in your journey both of you complement and supplement each other.
So this was the opening recorded session, which was live streamed from Professor Arora, and he talked about health ecosystem, the skills which one leader must possess. So now I request Dr. Sanjeev Kumar to speak on health system research in India. Now, regarding Dr. Sanjeev, if you are a public health leader and willing to become one, or willing to become one, and never has attended a session by Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, I believe you are incomplete. Coming to Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, he did his MBBS and MD from AIIMS, New Delhi, because I almost know his biodata by now. since I have attended many of his sessions. And he also did his DNB in MCH and MBA in Strategic Management from University of Wales. Dr. Sanjeev Kumar has more than 40 years of experience in public health, and he has worked in more than 30 countries, including countries in Central and South Asia, Southern Africa, Central Europe, and in academics he has been for quite long. He started his actual career as a medical officer in Indian Army. Later, he's worked as in PHCs of Haryana and urban areas of Delhi. Then he moved to UNICEF and started as a health specialist at state and national level in India. And then he moved into various other countries. And he has worked as Chief of Health, Nutrition, Child Survival and Development, and as Senior Advisor in Iraq, Kenya, Uganda, Somalia, and has been Regional Advisor for 22 countries in Central Asia, Central and Eastern Europe. So he has worked as Executive Director recently at NHSRC at New Delhi, Director IIHMR New Delhi. He is now Chair Advisory Committee Indian Alliance of Patients Group and Chair of Indian Academy of Public Health. And currently, he is the founder chairperson of 3 Domain Health Leadership Foundation. His interests include capacity building and leadership, public health analysis, strategic management, team building for various corporate sector, United Nations agencies, and health institutions. Over to you, sir. It will be a pleasure to hear from you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Shiv Shekhar Datta. The introduction was very long and overawes me, so people expect a lot more. Let me start with the basics. I will start with leadership and then come to health systems and health policy leadership, the topic assigned to me. There are 2 aspects of leadership. One is leadership skills. Everyone working in any organization, right from security guard to the director, needs leadership skills. You know, Dr. Archisman in his introduction says communication. Can you imagine a security guard without communication? And he is the one who faces most of the unpleasant communication. You know, people want to barge in and he has to stop them from entering. So some of the skills are required. But as you move up the hierarchy, the spectrum of the leadership skills and the level of leadership skills increases. And those of you who want to look at real life experiences, I documented my experience right from primary health center up to international level. And this article is published as a J.E. Park Oration article in the September 2020 issue of IA of Indian Public Health Association, Indian Journal of Public Health. So you will get an overview. At PHC also you need leadership skills. So as you move up the hierarchy, so in Dr. Arora's presentation, he talked about very highly placed leaders, Dr. Bhan, Dr. Ganguly, etc. Yes, at that level. But I'm more concerned about grooming leadership skills at PHC, moving up to district, state, national, international level, and then maybe heading organizations. So that's one aspect I wanted to highlight. The single thing which sets apart a leader right in the early stages of career development is clarity. These people, even in MD residency level or even in MBBS level, you will find these people are very clear as to what they want to do. What is their purpose in life? Priority is education. They focus on studies. They focus on, if they're into sports, they focus on sports. So they're very, very clear in their priority. I call it purpose in life. So they're very clear what is their purpose in life. And when we leave the world, what we should be known as. You know, when you come to my stage, then you look at how you would be known. So that clarity of purpose. I will not go into more details of this. I will bring in the health system and health policy aspect. What is health policy? And we were involved in writing the National Health Policy 2070. You have your constitution, which identifies certain elements of health which needs to be included. So you start from there, then you look at what has gone on in the country in the field of health. You have had large number of committees, though they are not formally called as policy making bodies, starting with the Bohra Commission, and then come to various committees. So though we did not have a formal policy till 1983, but we had various documents on which we built. And then 1983 policy, 2002 policy, and then 2017 policy have been progressing in that direction. How does the policy achieve the goals? Policy is more like a roadmap. You have this situation today, this is what has happened in the past, and in next 15 to 20 or 10 years or 5 years, you want to get there. To get there, you already have a health system. Essentially, 1983 policy talked about health system, population covered, and so on. And then we expanded, we had National Health Mission, which further strengthened the health system. But what is the weakness? How we define the health system? First weakness is we look at health policy only for public health system. You will at best find a paragraph or a page or two about private sector. And when we know healthcare, medical care, I call it, because healthcare also includes prevention and promotion. There is very little prevention and promotion there, but medical care is provided to 70 to 80% of the population by private sector. It may be organized, non-organized. That is one weakness we have policy. There's very little discussion on those who are providing most of the healthcare in India. And then when it comes to health, we know from Health in All Policy Initiative of WHO that 90% of health comes from non-health sector. Water, sanitation, and those of us in Delhi, some of you are lucky you are not in Delhi, every day we feel suffocated because of the air pollution. As if that was not enough, now you have water pollution. Yamuna water for days together, for months together, is frothing because of chemicals which are contaminated there. So, there are many other agriculture, what you produce, the price of essential food items and other things you need for healthy living, that determines. So 80 to 90% of health comes from non-health sector. Health policy, at least 2017, highlights that aspect. Previous policies never highlight. And then if you don't have other sectors buying into what you want to achieve in health, you will lose out. You will lose out on that. So we have to first understand, if you want to play leadership role, you need to look at comprehensive health approach. That is how public health is different from clinical medicine. Clinical care, you be a heart transplant surgeon, excel in it. You don't look at what are the factors which are making people reach your operation table for heart transplant or coronary bypass, etc., etc. So those aspects you need to take care as a leader. Then look at health system. You need to look at health system in a more comprehensive manner. So one message for every one of you is a leader in health looks at health in a comprehensive manner. Look at many clinicians who became good public health leaders. Dr. Arora just talked to us. He's a pediatrician. Dr. V.K. Paul, again a pediatrician. Dr. Srinath Reddy, a cardiologist. But they moved from their narrow clinical focus to big picture focus. So you have to keep that in mind. And in public health, we look at population. We look at the whole population. Those who are healthy, how do we keep them healthy? What other sectors should be doing in health so that people don't fall sick? Otherwise, you are just opening more and more hospitals and more people are falling sick, and you are always running out of adequate specialists, adequate hospital beds, and so on. So that's an important aspect for us to consider, that we always keep in our mind comprehensive approach, holistic approach to health, whole population approach to health. The other aspect I have seen dealing with renowned people who are excellent in the field of public health. You know what they miss? As Dr. Archisman said, communication. And we should be honest to ourselves, honest to our speciality. And there is a saying, but at the same time not be impolite. in Skand Puran there is a verse, एक श्लोक है स्कंद पुराण में, सत्यम ब्रूयात प्रियम ब्रूयात, ना ब्रूयात सत्यम अप्रियम, प्रियम च नानृतम ब्रूयात, ईशा धर्मा सनातना. What does it mean? Speak the truth, but politely. Don't annoy the health secretary or other people who are not experts like you. I have seen many times, many of my friends from preventive and social medicine, excellent teacher, written large number of papers, even textbooks. But when they come to the meeting, they talk as if everyone else is rubbish. They are the only one who are the wise people. They are not called to the next meeting. The next one says, Na bruyat satyam apriya. सच बोलो मगर अच्छे से बोलो, so that you don't annoy people. तो तुझे क्या पता, are you a specialist? I am the specialist. I am telling you. Gone, you lost a friend for life. Priyam च नानृत्यात् भूयात्. It is not being true to yourself and to your speciality if you do not speak when some untruth is being spoken. Raise your voice. Speak up, but in a pleasant manner. No, sir, what you are saying is not right. You have plasma therapy going on for months together. After it was shown it doesn't work. You also had many medicines being given. Remdesivir is one example when people knew it doesn't help. And every one of these, including plasma therapy, remdesivir, has side effects. It may kill more people than it helps. We know it doesn't help. It may have killed many people because of side effects. And just imagine, people paid 40,000 rupees for one vial, and you need at least 5 vials for a complete treatment. So keep this in mind. And there's a lot of wisdom in our ancient books. Go to it. So again, before ending, communication is very important. But with communication, satyam bruyat, priyam bruyat, na bruyat satyam apriyam, priyam cha nanritam bruyat, isha dharma satya. This is the gospel truth. It is true today. It will be true tomorrow. It was true in the past. Thank you so much. And back to you, Dr. Shivshekhar.
Wonderful to hear from you, sir. There were 7-8 points which I have already noted down, and I'll conclude at the end. But it was nice to hearing you. Now after Sanjeev sir's session, I'll be introducing another stalwart. But before that, his topic, what we have requested, sir, Professor Sanjay Zodpe, is research capacity building and Indian academic institutes. Now, research is a cornerstone for knowledge generation that we all know, which in turn requires capacity building for its tools and techniques. Now, despite having a vast infrastructure in India, the research in medical science has been not up to the mark and is being carried out in limited and very focused institutes, the premier institutes. The focus of research is also different in low-income countries and high-income countries. We also know most research is conducted in the low-income countries. Actually, what I've searched from literature are based on epidemiology, sociology, and a few clinical subjects. Well, most of the research done in developed countries or high-income countries are basically of intervention trials. Now, also, when I searched literature, there was an article published in 2009 where it says most of the Indian publications are not related to the demands of the country. So, with this context, I'll be requesting Dr. Zodpe. Before that, let me introduce to Dr. Zodpe. Dr. Zodpe is Vice President Academics, Public Health Foundation of India, New Delhi, and he is also the Director, Indian Institute of Public Health in Delhi. He is the immediate past President, National President of Indian Association of Preventive and Social Medicine. Sir actually started his career as a professor of Department of Preventive and Social Medicine, faculty in Clinical Epidemiology Unit, Vice Dean at Government College Nagpur. He also holds a joint appointment as adjunct professor in 5 other international universities, namely Georgia Southern University, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, University of Sydney, Deakin University, and Patan Academy of Health Sciences at Nepal. Apart from this, he has been leading various chair, like chair of Global Evaluation and Monitoring Network for Health. He is board member of Routine Health Information Network. Earlier, he has served as member of Institute of Medicine at a Global Forum on Innovation in Health Professional Education. He was earlier appointed as the country lead for Asia Pacific Network at Health Professional Education Reforms. And we know him for his various leading publications. And Sir has also been ranked recently in top 2% scientists across the world for his research contribution in the field of tropical medicine. So may I welcome Professor Sanjay Zordbe. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sheep, for this generous introduction. And thank you, GREET Council and Archie and Anil and Wasim for organizing this webinar. It is extremely timely. And why I'm saying is that a few months back, the world ranking of the institutions globally was released in the health sector. And whenever such kind of world rankings of academic institutions are released, generally, we would try to look at our Indian institutions in the list. And then sometimes we feel that, we don't have positions or ranks. And then we start soul searching, what's wrong actually? We need to really ponder and reflect on some of the issues related to how can we transform our academic institutions from education-driven to the research-driven institutions. Because 21st century universities, institutions, and departments will have to be research-driven. And from that perspective, it is important to reflect some of these relevant issues. Because we all recognize that although the job of the universities and institutions is to produce graduates, with competence and adroit and skills, where they would be able to function and being a part of the labor workforce globally. But we all recognize that the role of the universities, our institutions and department is very much there in knowledge generation and translation. And that's how we contribute to the science. So the role of the university and institutions is very much there in upscaling the science. And in that context, basically, we will have to figure it out. How do we look at our own institutions and what do we do to transform our academic institutions? And when I say academic institutions, today we have representation from several departments of community medicine. So let's even focus on our medical schools and our departments, that how do we make them more research driven? What should we be doing? What should we be doing for that purpose? I will give, enlist some points for that. For example, for any institution or for a department, we should have a research mandate. And when we wanted to say that we need to create a research-driven institution or a department, do we have a research mandate? We will have a discussion today on even creating research enabling environment. So all efforts towards that direction are important. Department should also have a strategic plan to strengthen and enhance the research output of our departments. And therefore, probably we will also have to undertake research priority setting, both at the national and global context, but with focal local problems. We'll also have to ensure effective role of our research advisory boards, research tracking systems, review mechanisms, and at times for that purpose, even to subscribe for external review of our own research portfolios also. From that perspective, suppose I'm working, and I used to work as a faculty in Department of Preventive and Social Medicine those days, nowadays community medicine in Government Medical College, Nagpur. Then the question is about the SWOT analysis. As a department, research portfolio is concerned, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Research collaborations and partnerships are very much emphasized by Professor Arora also. And there are systematic mechanisms that you can handle around that to enhance our research collaborations and partnership, both at the national and global level. Research leadership program and research mentorship programs are very important. Although we all recognize that the leadership skills and mentorship, it actually evolves over a period of time. Nobody becomes the leader overnight, but there has to be systematic, strategic, conscious efforts to build these mentorship and leadership skills. And direct engagement of the top leadership of the department and institutions in enhancing and promoting research also remains critical. We should also need to have mechanisms for institutional research funds. And as being mentioned by Professor Arora, I was listening to him quietly, that you need to be focused. And it's not only for the researchers, also in a department where you have 15, 18, 20 faculty members, you cannot do all kind of research. We can still identify certain thematic areas and we can be more focused. You may choose like anemia or NCDs or reproductive health or tobacco or any other matter for that matter. There has to be systematic efforts for research capacity building also. And capacity building, when we talk about research capacity building that she also requested me to talk about, is not only focus on research skills. Sometimes we feel that methods, of course, that is at the center. You should be a good methodologist, knowledge of epidemiology, study design, statistics, economics, extremely important. And even, but beyond that, beyond methods, we should also have detailed understanding, a very comprehensive understanding of thematic areas. Suppose you wanted to do research in tuberculosis. You know tuberculosis by heart. You wanted to do research in diarrhea, and Dr. Arora also mentioned about this. Then the capacity building in the context of writing skills that I experienced at times, the communication skills, which were also emphasized by Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, is extremely important. Writing skills are very critical. Oral communication skills are very important. Even the capacity to handle mega projects, because a simple one project is something else. But if you're handling a multi-century, multi-site, multi-country projects, then you need a different set of skills for that purpose. Then more importantly, we need to also have publication-driven MD and PhD programs. That what is the output of our MD thesis as long as the publications and contributions to the research are concerned. Engagement of the stakeholders, including professional associations, is something needs to be also looked at and enhanced. Then agency supported programs like Wellcome Trust DBT fellowship programs or Inspire fellowship programs. There are several opportunities that department will have to proactive to see that how do we grab these opportunities. And of course, then to enhance our investigator initiated grant applications also. And for that, you need those grant making ship know-how. You need to write that, how do you write grants? And again, it happens, over a period of time. It's not that today you are MD and tomorrow you would be able to independently write grants. If you work as a part of the team over a period of time under the mentorship and, senior leaders, probably you would be able to build those skills. Of course, you need institutional review mechanisms also that one needs to look at from the perspective of capacity building. Even our mechanisms of faculty selection and appointments and promotions, of course, they give weightage to the research, but I think how do we measure research is also important. It's not only the number of publications in terms of quantity, but its impact in terms of maybe impact factor. And there are several ways that one can measure. We'll not get into that, but actually how it contributes to the program and policy becomes more relevant. Even somebody has done a couple of publications, but have impacted something which really contributes to the program and policies, which has a larger societal goal, is much more relevant and important than 30, 40, 50 publications where nobody reads them. Also, that balance needs to be looked at. Even when you have an adjunct faculty or honorary professorship positions in other universities, also provides you the opportunity of collaborating. Then the mandatory requirements. Right now, there are limited mandatory requirements in terms of grants and publications, but they are also needs to be looked at. Then platform for open and transparent discussions is also important. Dr. Arora was mentioning that forwarding an application to the head of the department and sometimes institutional heads, we have to deal with the people, and those negotiation skills are very important. But to ensure that open and transparent discussion happens is important. Constituting self-help groups is important. If you are working in a department where like-minded 3 or 4 people together and then write a grant and then procure a grant and do a research is important. So creating research teams is something which is very important in promoting research and transforming our departments. Then regular meeting, research retreats, Exposure is also important. When you, in fact, I tell you my story quickly is that my research engagement started with the Inkland program, and I got tremendous opportunities to build not only my method skills, but also to work on some collaborative projects. And that has really transformed my research potential. And I think that's what is important, that you need to get exposures. Then institutional visits to other universities and departments are critical and important. Then attracting star research is important for an institutions, creating research champions, research leaders that Dr. Sanjeev Kumar and Professor Arora also spoke about. Then constitution of research awards for that matter, best publications, and the quality that was being rightly mentioned is that the leader is a good leader who actually appreciates that someone is doing good job. That's more important. Focus on transdisciplinary research, because you need to solve problems much more holistically, and therefore you need a more transdisciplinary approach. Multicentric, multi-site, multi-country research, policy and program research is relevant and important. Media engagement is also important. Showcasing research, you need to have enough space, and from that you have to see that how best you can present your research. And finally, establishing research credibility is important. Over a period of time, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, you should be able to establish your research credibility for individual researchers, but even for our departments and institutions, and that's how it will be recognized. So from that perspective, you have to see that how do we transform our academic institutions into a research-driven institution. Sometimes the question, many times we listen to our young colleagues is that there are inadequate opportunities. But you talk to the donor agencies and they would say that there is a limited research competence. There is some mismatch between researchers and donors' perspectives. There are enough opportunities for the people who have really good competencies. And as I mentioned, from the capacity point of view, methods are important. But soft skills like communication skills are important. Your understanding of ethics and regulatory mechanisms is important. Your knowledge in thematic areas is critical. And more importantly, management and leaderships are also equally important because there are big projects. And if you are not able to manage those projects, mega projects particularly, then subsequently the donor agency would not come back to you. Because you create your own signature as a researcher over a period of time. You work with one agency, do a good research project. I'm sure that agency will come back to you requesting that, can you please help us in resolving this research question? They will be after you. You would reach a situation, you would become so choosy that I want to do this and not this, because the people will be after you. But for that, you have to create your own signature as a credible researcher. Sometimes people take the projects and they are not able to deliver those projects in the timelines. Sometimes budgets are overspent. Sometimes very shabby work is done. Quality is questioned. So all these issues are critical and important to establish a credibility, not for an individual researcher, but even our department and institutions. I think if we can focus upon these all issues, I think we will be able to transform our departments as research-driven departments, and will contribute sensibly in advancing the public health science, not only nationally, but also globally. Thank you so much. Back to you, Shiv.
Thank you, sir. There were almost 20 points, which each point needs maybe 10-minute discussion, but we'll discuss. And of course, we'll send the bulleted summary points to the participants, and we'll send the detailed discussion to you also. Thank you so much, sir, for the session. And over to you, Anil.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So it was very, the talk from sir was showing the experience what he has done. Thank you, sir. Okay, so we have understood that being a leader, we should understand many things. Now we have discussed with our eminent speaker that what is the status and what are huge challenges. But even after we come to the stage that, okay, we are going to do some research, public health research, but still in India, especially we have read or we have experienced also that most of the public health researcher get stuck in the area where the non-productive area while doing research. So the management of the research is very, very important and very vital, especially for saving our important time while doing research. So when any public health researcher come to the stage that, okay, we are going to implement the policy or start the research in the health, public health research especially, then it comes that we should know few more qualities, and we get stuck in that. These are like a role of research management skill and the system in promoting research in Indian academic institute. That is very vital. We lack that. We should also know what are the typical job description for a research manager, because managing research is very important to upscale the quality of research and of course save the time for different other works also. And we should also know what are the key challenges for research management in current scenario and how could this be overcome. So for all these, we are very fortunate to have next speaker, Dr. Savita Iyer. I will introduce her. Dr. Savita Iyer is the founder of Jacaranda Tree, an independent consultancy service supporting organization with their research management need. Dr. Iyer has received her initial training in biochemistry at the University of Delhi and biotechnology at AIIMS New Delhi. She completed her doctoral work in developmental biology at University of Cambridge, UK, supported by the Cambridge Commonwealth Trust Fellowship. Following a period of postdoctoral research at the University of Cambridge, she moved to Wellcome Trust in London. Following that, she relocated to India to initiate and nurture the activities of Research Development Office at the National Center for Biological Sciences, Bangalore. Under her stewardship, operations at NCBS and RDO grew to include international partnership, grant management, philanthropic fundraising and endowment, management of intramural funding, and news and communications. She's currently working on behalf of DBT and Wellcome Trust India Alliance to develop IRMI, that is the India Research Management Initiatives. So we are very fortunate and eager to hear you, ma'am. Over to you, Savita Iyer, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anil, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you also very much to the Grid Council for inviting me here, sharing the stage with such eminent other panelists. I'm really honored to be here. So I think the previous talks lead very beautifully into what I have to say, particularly what Professor Zodpe had to say. So just picking up on some of those strands there, research, of course, is crucial for knowledge generation. And, central to research actually is raising funding for research. And invariably, scientists, researchers spend a lot of their time writing grants, competing for it at funding agencies, and securing that funding. And it doesn't stop there. So then there's the actual management of the program and ensuring that there is follow-on funding. So this is actually quite a challenging task, and here's where research management actually comes in. So what I'd like to do is maybe just to give you the researcher perspective first, that, in this whole process of writing grants and securing funding, a researcher needs to keep track of deadlines of different kinds of funding agencies, what their policies and guidelines are, what the deadlines are, and often many schemes are announced at very short notice. So to be able to capitalize on that, but to put the entire application package together, get the budget right, get the approvals in place, all in time for the deadline, can be a huge demand on a very busy researcher, especially if that researcher is a clinician as well, a public health practitioner. The competing demands on this person's time can make it really quite difficult to get all of the paperwork together on time and the approvals on time. And Professor Zodpe, referred to team science, to working as part of, large consortia, bringing different kinds of expertise to bear on, tackling complex challenges. And again, for the average researcher, this can be really quite daunting, to have to find the time, energy, and put in the effort to coordinate all of the activities of the consortium, bringing the consortium together, arriving at the consensus, putting agreements together, and finally that culminating in a grant proposal can be really a very demanding process. And once the grant is activated, again, there are various requirements. So in addition to running the program, which has been funded, The researcher usually has to meet funder obligations like annual reporting, that's both financial reporting and technical reporting. There might be changes during the course of the project. So, engaging with funding agencies around those changes, you might need an extension, or you might decide that you need to move your grant. Well, if you're moving to another institution, can you move your grant to another institution? So managing all of those changes, managing the personnel, managing the equipment purchases, all within the framework of this funded program, again, that takes a lot of time and effort. And so to keep on track of all of those different deadlines can be quite a challenge. Professor Zodpe also referred to the ethics, review process and the statutory compliances. Again, this is definitely the case in public health research. The statutory compliances form a very important part of enabling research, and many funding agencies may actually require the ethical approvals to be in place before they will even release the funding. So again, looking at it from the point of view of the researcher, there are so many competing pressures to ensure that the project proposal is written well, the collaborators are on board, the institutions are on board, the ethics approvals are in place, and all in time for a very difficult submission deadline. So that's from the point of view of the researcher. And if we look at it from the point of the institution, of course, institutions have a huge responsibility to making this possible for researchers, for providing the right kind of administrative support. But let's just look at it from the institutional side. It's not just the one researcher, it's not just the one particular grant proposal that's going through. A typical institution will have a much larger number of proposals going through. So can the institution have a mechanism in place for oversight of those proposals? That's one part of it. Can they sign up to the terms and conditions? So if they have 50 investigators who are applying to 50 different sources, what are the terms and conditions of those different sources of funding? Can the institution actually sign up to that? Again, if there are agreements that are needed between different partners, collaborating partners, that needs oversight. So this is at the point of submission, but then again, post-award, again, it's not just a single grant, but the institution has a responsibility to ensure that all the grants in the portfolio are well managed. Their financial reporting is on time, the technical reporting is on time, the funder relations are managed well. And the statutory compliances, the institution has an obligation to have the ethics committees configured and running well. So again, there's the institutional perspective, there's the PI perspective, and in today's contemporary world with the different kinds of opportunities that are coming up at very short notice, it's really quite a challenge to keep all of these activities going without a centralized service. And this is where research management comes in. If institutions invest in a centralized research management unit, then the RM office can actually work on behalf of both the institution and the researcher to ensure that all of these activities are aligned, they are completed in time for the deadline, they're completed to the requisite standards. So each funding agency and scheme usually comes with a set of criteria and guidelines, and the harried researcher really doesn't have the time to ensure that, for example, just take an example of the budget, there are allowed costs and disallowed costs for every funding scheme. And it's very difficult for researchers to keep track of that, whereas a central research office, the staff in such an office, would be mandated to keep themselves abreast of all of these changing policies and guidelines and to support their researchers as they need. And likewise work with the institutional leadership to ensure that all of this aligns with the research strategy of the institution, that it complies with institutional norms, and work through with the administrative teams, providing the context, providing the oversight, to ensure that all of these external funded programs are extremely well managed. So this, in a nutshell, is the role of a research management office. And this has been in existence in countries like the US and the UK for several decades. And in India, we're just only very recently starting to wake up to the need for these kinds of offices. And, there are several challenges in ensuring that research management becomes embedded in our Indian systems. So the first is actually cultural. For so many decades, we have been used to conducting research and all of these associated activities without a research management unit. So that change in itself is a big cultural shift, and that's something that institutions are getting used to. The second challenge is, of course, finding staff with the requisite skills, or empowering research managers with the right kind of skills, hard skills and soft skills, so that they can effectively contribute to their organizations. And the third challenge is to create career tracks for such staff, which leads to the question of sustainability of the research offices. Here again, we can learn from what has been done in other countries, where there is a very well prescribed model for both direct investments and investments through institutional overheads into research offices. But these are all various kinds of changes which are needed here in India to make research management the norm and to ensure that the funded programs and researchers and institutions are supported as they need it. And so on this note, I'd just like to take a few minutes to talk you through the ERMI initiative. This is the India Research Management Initiative. This is an initiative of the DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance. And ERMI has 4 strategic priorities. The first priority is supporting institutions that want to build research management structures. The second is supporting research managers with their career development needs, networking needs. The third is building national and international partnerships in the area of research management. And the fourth is building a community of practice, because right now we have a small number of research managers at Indian institutions, and it would be wonderful for them to come together and share best practice and for the community to grow. So these priorities of ERMI are being implemented through 2 mechanisms. The first mechanism is that there are some flagship funding programs. So there is funding available. So there's the RM Fellowship Scheme. This is a 3-year fellowship. It's for institutions that are at an early stage of creating their research office. There are the RM grants for institutions which already have a research office, but which want to add some features to their existing office. And there are travel grants available for research managers to travel and attend international conferences in the field of research management. So if I can just explain that, research managers in many other countries are organized into associations. For example, in the UK, there's an association of research managers and administrators called ARMA. The USA has 2 separate associations. Japan has an association. And each of these societies or associations generally hosts an annual conference and training programs, which can be open to international participants as well. And through the ERMI initiative, we're very supportive of Indian research managers tapping into these modes of networking and training. So those are what the travel grants are intended for. And besides the flagship funding programs, we curate a whole set of events, community building events that bring research managers, researchers, institutional leaders, and others together, administrators as well. And I'd just like to highlight that in February this year, we hosted the first conference for research managers in India. This was a very, very enlightening exercise. We had amazing discussions. We had talks, panel discussions, and training workshops. And we hope to curate, we look forward to curating actually the 2nd edition of the conference in 2022 October. We'll very much look forward to that. So this is just a call out to all those who are attending today. If you're interested in the ERMI initiative, all the details of the initiative are there on the India Alliance website, and I'll just put a link to the initiative in the chat box. Also, our webinars are archived on the India Alliance YouTube channel, and I'll put a link to that as well. So please do take a look at that. And if you have any queries about the ERMI initiative, the funding schemes, you can always drop a message into the ERMI mailbox and someone from the team will get back to you. And we do look forward to seeing some of you at the forthcoming ERMI annual conference if you have an interest in research management. So I'll stop on that note. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Savita. Thank you so much. We are realizing that, okay, there are few fragmented initiatives for the research management, but yes, we are in need of systematic research management, and you are doing a wonderful job, and we will be excited to get participated in the conference next year, surely. Thank you so much. We will come back to you. Now, we have heard all the 4 speakers, and now the floor is open for the discussion, especially the question answer session. So over to Shib sir for opening the session for the question answer session.
Thank you, Dr. Savita. This has been really a new addition to research leadership domain. Now, regarding the few of the questions which has been put into the chat box, Dr. Venkatesh wants to get his answer on, while seeking for the grants in aid, could capacity building of the investigator be incorporated? So,
yeah, Dr. Shib, this is Dr. Zorpe. If
yes,
I mean, I looked at a question by Dr. Venkatesh, and it's a very important question. It depends on the project. It depends on the kind of a grant. But there are, when we say grants, basically they could be for research purpose. So research grants, sometimes they are specifically for capacity building purpose. Sometimes there are travel grants. Sometimes there are program development grant. So it depends the purpose of the grant, actually, you know.
yes.
If it is for particularly purely for a research, but despite that, if it's a big project, generally there is an opportunity where you can build on capacity building, budget some activities of attending some training or conference or capacity building. But I would say that budgeting is one part. But in addition to that, you work on even a small piece of research. There's always informal an opportunity for capacity building. You learn something, even, you know, at senior 30, 40 years career in research also, even you do a project right now, you would learn something out of that particular project. So I think that continuous learning process, you do research, you will continue to learn. But I think Dr. Venkatesh was pointing to ask that whether it could be budgeted. Yes, it could be budgeted, provided, you know, the project is on those lines. It can be included, but sometimes even some donor agencies, in fact, encourage capacity building component because that's overall in the larger interest of the research being carried out. Thank you.
Sir, one more question is there for you from you, your friend, Dr. Abhay Gadane. He's asking, sir, we feel in addition to scientific rigor, communication, and advocacy skill, stakeholder management are critical in securing grants. So, sir, Zorpe sir, this is for you. He is asking your thoughts on this and how we as a researcher could manage these issues.
Because I'm not able to see the question, but if I understand clearly, stakeholder management means managing agencies and other partners involved in the project.
Sir, I repeat the question.
Yeah.
He's saying that we feel in addition to scientific rigor, communication, and advocacy skill, stakeholder managements are critical in securing grants. And he's asking your thoughts on this and how we as a researcher can manage these issues.
Sure, absolutely. See, we deal with the stakeholders, and stakeholders would include donor agencies. They could include your partners and collaborators within the country, within the institutions and outside the institution. And therefore, at times there are conflicts. So you have to learn this leadership skills of conflict resolution. Even sometimes you have to negotiate on certain issues. Even, for example, there are 4 institutions participating with different skills and the budget is being drafted. So there is some negotiation there also. Responsibility sharing is also equally important in that context. So there is a scope and there is a need of I would say, these skills of negotiation, conflict resolution, which are critical and important. But I would also say, along with the donor agencies, once you establish a good credibility with them, which I mentioned earlier but wanted to repeat, is that if you create your signature as a good researcher, honest researcher, a good quality research you can produce, you can do job timely, you can use budget more efficiently and effectively, then that's how actually you can build your image. And then you don't have to look for, and those relationships are built in the process basically. And that's how you have to learn all these soft skills of managing people, because we all are human beings for that matter. But ultimately what matters is how do you create your own signature.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Right. Ship sir, do you have any other question?
No, I don't see any other.
Okay, I have got one more question.
Okay. Okay.
One participant is asking, can you discuss the difference in ecosystem available at government and non-government setups, and the opportunities more in one, but the ease of doing business better in other? So how can we choose institution depending on this difference? Any speaker can take this?
Sanjeev sir has raised his hand.
Yeah. Sanjeev sir, please. Sir, please unmute yourself. Sanjeev sir. Sanjeev sir, please unmute yourself. You are muted.
You are muted, sir. The host is not allowing.
Yes, I got it now. Thanks to the host for allowing me to unmute myself. So there are three aspects. We are all public health practitioners, epidemiologists, whatever we want to call ourselves. There are three aspects. I will prefer to use the term evidence. When you talk about research, you talk about primary research. This is an area I want to work. Why I am emphasizing this is, one is the available evidence is not being put into practice in health policy, health systems, and the intervention we have. And I can go on and on to give you example of recent COVID outbreak. There was some interventions approved only for emergency use, but they went to scale. In Delhi, opening plasma banks one after the other, and media. So there are two things which happen. One is there is a lot of malpractices going on. It may be innocent. Some people keep forwarding messages, for example, in social media. The other may be for political gain. They want to project they are doing a lot more, even if it is unproven intervention. Then there may be business deals. Some of the Ayurvedic medicines were promoted and we didn't find any evidence. And then government had to snub them. They're promoting it. So we as practitioners of public health have to raise our voice against unscientific interventions which are included and take away a lot of resources and unnecessarily do harm. So that is one aspect. Second aspect of research in the academicians and research world. You do your research and you publish in Lancet, BMJ, and you're very happy, my job is done. No. As a public health practitioner, your end point is what research you have done, it needs to get into practice. It needs to get into standard treatment protocol guidelines. It needs to get into policy. That is the end point. Yes, publication helps because after you have published, they take it seriously. That is not the end point. And most of the people participating here are academicians or researchers. My message to them is please don't stop with your research. Publish, take it to evidence. Dissemination is very important. After you have published, it gets into your CV very well, but share it through social media. There are some good aspects of social media. Anybody who has access to social media has become a publisher and an author. So most of the time it is done in a wrong manner. And those of you who are doing genuine research, why don't you use social media to disseminate what you have done? That will influence policy and practices of public health. And public health is everything. Curative medicine is also public health. Don't think that public health is only what preventive and social medicine or community medicine department. Public health, remember those 5 levels of prevention? early diagnosis, treatment, disability limitations, and rehabilitation. After the patient has recovered, you are putting the patient back into normal life. So remember, that is public health. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Can we have from all our 4 panelists, because Arora sir is not there, can we have one, two concluding remarks from Sanjeev sir and Sanjay sir and Dr. Savita? Sanjeev sir, just 1 or 2 concluding remarks for our participants.
No, I will only emphasize, all of you are scientists trained in research. You speak the truth, scientifically valid truth. But remember, what you say is important, but how you say is even more important. So keep that in mind. You will be a lot more effective than how effective you are at present. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Zodpe sir to please give your concluding remarks, please.
While doing research, I would encourage to remember that science is sterile if it lacks the social relevance, and policies would crumble on clay feet if they are not firmly placed on a pedestal of valid science. Knowledge management is critical, but it has 2 components: knowledge generation and knowledge translation. Knowledge generation would give you the thrills of discovery, but knowledge translation would give you the purpose fulfilled. Therefore, aim for that. Thank you.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you so much. Now I request Dr. Savita Iyer to please give some concluding remarks for this webinar.
Well, thank you very much. And I think our attendees today are some of the brightest public health researchers and practitioners in the country. There's so much that you can do for India, and do think of enabling funding for the research component of your work. And with the funding proposals, just make sure that you put out the best proposal you can, get feedback from your peers, from mentors in the field, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Savita. Over to you, Shiv, sir.
We'll be just summarizing the key points by our panelists. So I'll be summarizing Arora sir. What
Yes.
Arora sir said in just 5 or 6 key points is that research leaders start with persistence. They go through hard work and they're not distracted. He gave the example of Lov Samvaran. And so if you are patient and persistent, you will definitely be a research leader. And sir gave example of all stalwart researchers in public health. Now, what he said are the 4 pillars in research leadership is that first is technical competence and professional competence. The second is the research leaders are ambitious like all of us, and but they do persist with this ambition, and they look out for opportunity, and they utilize the opportunities to the best of their possible way. And researchers don't bother about success or failure. And he talked about the ecosystem, and he said that what is ecosystem? We create the ecosystem. And he also talked about negotiating with while going for collaboration or partnership. And he said for equal power in when you go for collaboration, and that leaders are always in context and they know how to make best use of the available resources. And talking about inequity, he said if you persist, that will complement your inequity, and we should share our resources, whatever is available, and we must understand the dynamics and the reality of the world if you want to become a leader. And he said today or tomorrow, if you persist with patience, then you will be a research leader.
Yes. In addition to that, he also emphasized on not to worry.
Yeah.
Leaders should not worry for the failure, and they should be competent enough to have negotiation skill. So
Yes.
these are very important key issues that he has raised. So
Right.
thank you,
Right.
Arora sir. In Sanjeev sir's talk, there were many key issues also. So I will summarize that. He started with the leadership skill, and he said that everybody should need the gatekeeper. That leadership skill, including the communication skills, are needed by everyone, not only the top leaders or the top administrator in the institute, but everyone should need. Now, of course, there are many stages, but in early stage, one should have clarity of mind. What is the purpose in the life? The purpose of life, especially in the professional life. He also emphasized on health policy, how it constitutes. He also talked about various. He also raised one issue that in healthcare sector, 70 to 80% is given by private sector. 90% of health come from non-health sector. That is like he has given the example of water pollution, air pollution, and so on. So he emphasized on the comprehensive approach as a leader, and he also advised all of us young professionals or young public health researcher to have a big picture in mind. Okay. He also emphasized that the leader in the health should have comprehensive approach, and we should look at population at large and the prevention aspect, and not only the disease. He also talked about, and lastly also he emphasized that what you are talking is important, but how you are talking is even more important. So we all young researchers should remember that.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Right. Thank you, Anil. Coming to Sanjay sir's talk, sir talked about how the institutes, academic institutes in India can be from knowledge, can be converted from knowledge-driven to research-driven institutes. Where sir said the role of universities is to upscale science. Institutes should have a research mandate. In that, in an institute, the departments can have a research ecosystem. Sir talked about a research tracking system and review mechanism in institutes and in department, and that we should evaluate our own research by external agencies just to look at how much it is fruitful and impactful. Then sir talked about the research portfolio to be that culture to be inculcated in Indian institutes. Research leadership and mentorship programs also has to be in place, and look out for how funds work. So sir talked about that in research, the focus should not only be on research methodology, which must be the mainstay in research leadership, but we must also find a thematic area. This was also reflected in Arora sir's talk, that we often are carried away by lucrative opportunities, and which is not our thematic area, not our priority. And we also should focus on writing skills, communication skills, capacity to deal with funds, because often we are not good at dealing with funds. And sir talked about, if we deal with one particular funding agency and we keep our signature, we leave our footsteps in that with the particular agency, the agency will be also be interested to work with us in future. So the soft skills sir was talking about, and that we should promote publication-driven programs like MPH, MD, PhD, all these programs in our institutes. Know how to write grants is an important aspect. And he also said that often we overlook at, we look at the number of publications while getting promotions or giving promotions. So maybe we can look at the impact of particular research, how much it was helpful in policy implications. Then we should build our own research team in our department, in institute, or in our arena. Then research exposure to senior researchers or a different research team, or in premier institutes where researchers being in practice. Then also we can think about attracting research champions to our institutes or in our team, so that we can promote our research and grant writing skills. Then sir talked about that to deal with different problems which exist in the population, we can think about interdisciplinary research, because that's how it's going to impact. That was also talked about by Sanjeev sir also. And not only we should do research, showcasing and advocating for research is also important. And then we can create a research road for ourselves in next few years, coming years. So I think that was, if I have missed something.
Yeah, there were many points in Sanjay Zodpe sir's talk. So he talked very elaborately from the challenges of mismatch between the researcher and the donor perspective up to the creation of your own signature as a researcher. Thank you so much. Even Savita ma'am has highlighted very unique issues, and especially we generally are not very much through with those issues, and there are huge scope she has emphasized, and she is working on those issues. Like she has divided her talk into two points, like as a researcher, what are the challenges and the skills one should have, and of course as an institution, what are the areas where the research management one institute should be highlighting. So as a researcher, starting with the project proposal writing, collaboration with on the board, and having IC clearance, then administrative approach one should as a researcher should focus on. But as an institution, generally we are focusing from ourselves. We look towards the problem from our own perspective. But as an institution, when we are a senior researcher, we should also think of improving the status of institution as a research management. So she highlighted the mechanism of oversighting the proposal, financial feasibility assessment. That is also very important thing. She has also emphasized the importance of MOU between the researcher or the institute and the donor agencies. Then the financial, technical capacities, and the timely ethical circulations, and all other management, and especially highlighted on institutional research unit that we have to upscale gradually. So these are the points, and surely we will be looking forward to the conference and the learnings what we are going to get from your. So thank you so much for being with us and enlightening all the participants, including the all organizers and moderators as well. So thank you so much, all the panelists. Thank you. Shiv sir.
I think that was all from our side, from the moderator side. So from the moderator side, we thank all the participants for attending the session, to the Grid Council for this opportunity, to all our panelists, all the 4 panelists, for enlightening us with your wisdom. Over to Dr. Wasim.
Thank you, Shiv sir, and thank you, Dr. Anil. Before I deliver the vote of thanks, I would like to convey all the congratulatory messages to all the participants and all the panelists from our participants also. First of all, thanks to the Almighty for making this possible. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have witnessed today is the terrific impulse and a blissful appearance of the aura of public health research in India. That is what is the beauty of public health research. And it would not be out of place. First, it would not have been possible without our eminent speakers, Professor N.K. Arora sir, for enabling us to demystify the myths of public health research ecosystem in India. Dr. Sanjeev Kumar sir, always a pleasure to listen to sir, and to his vision on leadership in health policy and systems research. Dr. Sanjay Zodpe sir, for his phenomenal input on research capacity building in Indian universities, and Dr. Savita Iyer ma'am for enlightening us on the status of research management in India, its challenges and solutions. I have no words strong enough to express my gratitude to the moderators of today's webinar, the catalysts, Professor Shiv Shekhar Datta, Professor of Community Medicine, TMC Agartala, and Dr. Anil Koparkar, Associate Professor of Community and Family Medicine, AIIMS Gorakhpur. I will be failing in my duty if I do not underline a very important role and the tireless effort made by Dr. Achisman Mohapatra, Executive Director, Grid Council, Noida, and his dynamic team of Grid Council, who is the brain behind this initiative. Last but not least, our sincere thanks to all the participants and delegates who were the soul of this event to make it successful by attending with enthusiasm. And let me remind you, this is the first installment in the series of mega webinars planned to enrich us all. As a token of gratitude and appreciation, we have an announcement. The participants and the delegates who have registered for today's webinar will be shared with curated resource materials from the resource persons, and all the delegates are requested to tune into the social media channels of Grid Council for the next installments of this webinar series, which will be announced shortly. Over to you, Dr. Achisman.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wasim, for summing it up so nicely, and for the vote of thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Sanjeev sir, Zodpe sir, Savita madam, for sparing time. It is really heartening to see that you took out so much time for us. We don't usually get to listen to these aspects. It's usually theory that we read, but these are practical hands-on experience. In absentia to Dr. Arora, thank you, sir. And thank you, Dr. Shib and Dr. Anil, for all the background work. So whatever shows up now is a week's hard work. So thank you so much. And thank you all audience for so actively participating. We have some resource material to share going away from here, and then some video links. The next webinar is on 17th of December. It's tentative. It will be in the evening because Sanjeev Kumar sir is in the US at that point of time. That's like hands-on, people who wrote national health policy hands-on, and the manifesto for the elections. So how political manifestos and policy are aligned and what skills they require. So that's an exciting webinar. We all want to be, not just leaders, also we want to impact policy. So we need to get that 360-degree view. So stay tuned for the next webinar, and the lineup is very interesting. So 4 more webinars to come up. Thank you so much, Zodpe sir. Thank you, Sanjeev sir. Thank you, Savita madam. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shib sir, Anil, Vasim, and all audience. Thank you.